I'm thinking all the time about the different subjects that we cover in Raj Yoga, and we talk about virtues and powers and qualities and values. And I just like to mention the historical background about people's interest in values. And when India got independence in 1947, it was a time of closely examining what is India, because it was completely new. What had been India was then divided into India and Pakistan and West Pakistan, and subsequently, you know the history. But every so often, the government would conduct surveys or establish commissions to find out the solution to different problems that it saw, going from a colony of Britain and other countries of Europe, and also having had prior to that, some couple of hundred years prior to that, 700 years of rule by Islamic emperors. And so India was looking for itself independently of those influences, and there were various different problems that were identified. And so there were 3 commissions. I can't remember now the dates, but one was in the 50s, one was in the 70s, and one was in the 80s or 90s. So every 20 years or so, a commission would be established, and the conclusion of all of these commissions is that the problem is people didn't have values. And so they asked different spiritual organizations and religious organizations to create material about values, so that instead of not having values, everybody would have values. And so this word values became a very important word to represent a solution to problems, to represent a like a wealth of India that would take away the lack of wealth in terms of the experience of people in India about what it means to be a person living in India, a person of India. And so this became very, very important, and it became very large. So any time a positive word was identified, it would be called a value. And we're looking at resilience as a value. But when I was preparing the course in values, I discovered many interesting things. And one thing I discovered was that you really need to identify what you mean by a value. And I think a lot of people believe that any positive word, which is a value, is a universal value. And in fact, it's not possible to have universal values. So resilience is a very important characteristic where you need resilience. But some people are naturally resilient in terms of their position in society, in terms of their circumstances, in terms of their health, and so on. And then there are other people who are not. And so resilience is important in circumstances where you need to be resilient. But if you look at animals, or if you look at plants, you'll see that there are some plants that are very resilient, very hardy, and they can survive very well in harsh circumstances. But then there are other animals and plants which cannot, and when their habitat is disturbed, then they don't survive. And that is not because the plant is good or bad, but it's just the way it is. And then when we take it over to human beings, of course everyone is different, and everyone has their own particular set of sanskaras. Some people are resilient health-wise, but not in other dimensions. Some people are resilient in the world of business. Other people are very clever but not very good business people. So you can see that resilience varies depending on the circumstances and in which particular aspect of resilience you may happen to have. So if I bring it into a spiritual dimension, and we also have to have a look at what does that mean, the spiritual dimension, because we use that word quite a lot. And in one way you could say the spiritual dimension is a very deep and private dimension of the mind where an individual is meditating and communing with God. And in that circumstance, the kind of resilience you need is resilience to that which we call negativity or maya or opposition. So let me talk a little bit about resilience in the spiritual dimension. When a person begins the practice of Raj Yoga, they will come into it from a particular angle, and different people come in from different angles. A lot of people come into it from a religious environment, and their aim is to get something deeper, something more spiritual into their religious environment. But not everybody is like that. Some people, when they come into Raj Yoga, they come in because they're looking for truth. And truth is a very broad term, and nobody really knows exactly what they mean by truth when they say, I'm looking for truth. But spirituality, of course, refers to spiritual truth, and which refers to truth concerning the soul, God, the laws of karma, all of these things. And India is the land of a gigantic array of scriptures, legends, myths, rituals, pilgrimage places, so many things. It's incredibly rich in terms of this. And when you come into the spiritual dimension of India, you're looking at a very broad terrain. And when you come into Raj Yoga is a very specific part of India, which is referred to in the scripture called the Bhagavad Gita, which is very, very well known. And there it's all about the circumstance of striving. We have this word tapasya, which I always translate as striving. You're striving for a spiritual purity so that you can experience and hold yourself steady in communion with the incorporeal Supreme Being. So that's the spiritual dimension. But there is a reaction to that. because the world we live in is fraught with difficulties and negativity and so on. Many people will say the world is hell for large numbers of people, those who are in war, those who are suffering from floods, those who are displaced, those who have financial difficulties, relationship difficulties. And when you want to be in this very subtle, internalized state of communing with the Supreme Being, which we call yoga, there are all sorts of things to pull you away from that. And so you need resilience in that area. Resilience in what way? It means that there will be thoughts that come up, memories that come up, which grab your mind and pull you into various emotions and distractions and memories and irritations and all sorts of emotions that you would not call spiritual, or that you would not call positive or pure, but they're realities, because when you want to sit still and be quiet and go deep inside, then all the things that lie in your mind and that you distract yourself from by getting busy with other things, they all come crowding in. So you need a lot of resilience for that. Why you need resilience is because when people are doing the work of spiritual practice, they don't necessarily expect that they have to resist anything negative or any distractions or any upsetting things that interfere with their yoga. So you need resilience in that area, because your attitude towards all this negativity has to be neutral. Because if you're pulled by it, if you don't like it, if you get fed up with it, if you lose faith in yourself and your ability to meditate, then you can't, because it's such a very subtle thing. So that's one aspect of resilience in terms of your inner life, your meditation. But the spiritual dimension is also broader, because you are a spiritual being in a physical body, living in a material world where you have many responsibilities and there's all sorts of things going on and you have to deal with them. And there's a lot of pairs of opposites. So one of the things that we learn about in the Bhagavad Gita is a very interesting shloka which says that you need to have neutrality in the face of the pairs of opposites. And it's a very, very famous phrase. And so anyone who wants to work on themselves and develop themselves, they will sooner or later encounter this aphorism, this statement from the Gita, which says you must be neutral in the face of success and failure, fame and defamation, heat and cold, comfort and discomfort, all the various positives and negatives that keep coming at you from all directions. So I think that there is a very deep connection between striving for neutrality and striving for resilience. Because after all, as Dr. Manoj said, resilience is about the ability to bounce back. And if you're neutral about things, they may come at you one side or another, pull and push and all of that. But you can recenter yourself in that place of equilibrium where you are actually neutral between these various different pairs of opposites. And it's not easy to be neutral. So then the question that arises is, how do you develop resilience in the form of neutrality? Because I think as neutrality, resilience is quite good as a value. It's a very great advantage if somebody is neutral in the face of all these pairs of opposites. So neutrality doesn't mean that you disconnect yourself. You need to be able to feel the power of the positive and negative, and to be able to handle that. I think sometimes people, when they try to be neutral, they tend to shut off their sensitivities. And when you shut off your sensitivities, you can be insensitive. But I think insensitive and neutral is not the same thing. I think that to be neutral while you are sensitive to everything is actually a higher value. It's a very good value. But that means that you have to be powerful. And in the study and practice of Raj Yoga, we do learn about developing different powers. And there are 8 in particular which are really very, very useful for anyone who is in the circumstances of the pairs of opposites. Things go well, things go badly, people like you, people don't like you, you have a good reputation, something comes along and ruins your reputation, which is nothing to do with you, but everyone believes it. So you have to handle that. So handling things has to do with the power of endurance, the power of tolerance, and this is one of the very important powers that you get in Raj Yoga. So resilience as a value, but also as a power, is very, very important in a person's life. Now, many people talk about stress. This is the big thing. Everybody is stressed. And some people think, let's try and have no stress, but that's very difficult. I think it's better to be able to handle stress. That means you have to develop resilience in the face of different kinds of stresses. And because stress is such a big issue, so many people talk about it, there's so many articles about it, programs about it, that it's a very dominant focus of attention. But I think resilience in the face of stress is a really very, very good thing to develop. And I think you can develop resilience in the face of stress quite realistically, because the question arose, how do you develop resilience? So if you think for a moment of all the things that stress you in particular, and what does it do to you when you feel stressed? And usually it diminishes your ability to function normally. And so that means that you cannot function normally because you are stressed. And the stress may be economic, it may be social, it may be emotional, it may be because you are having to do too many things in too little time, and you cannot handle it, but yet the circumstances are upgrading your stress, and then you react to that physically, emotionally, professionally, in all sorts of ways. So to develop resilience to stress in the workplace, stress in the family, stress in terms of your physical health is something that you can actually do, and there are techniques for it. I think whenever a person uses a technique, it is short-lived, because anything that's a technique, it doesn't have the same power, the same impact as something which becomes part of you. And so to develop an ability above and beyond a technique is what we're talking about here when we want to develop resilience. And I think in the process of developing resilience, you will definitely apply various techniques. So sometimes people say, okay, you have to breathe in a special way, and then you will use this technique to manage your stress. And that's okay for a little while, but it doesn't last very long. So it's all about making yourself stronger and more flexible. So that means you have to really look closely at yourself and see why you don't have resilience. And that's a very personal thing. One of the reasons why a person doesn't have resilience is because they take things personally. That's a very deep matter. How to not take things personally ever. We always hear about it. Oh, don't take this personally, don't take that personally. And you say, yes, I won't take it personally, but you do take it personally. So to actually not take something personally, you need a wider, broader understanding. And I'll give you an example of this. I was talking to a few people recently who were all dealing with a similar issue. And they were all writers. And a writer, a professional writer, has the stress of their editor, their news editor, or their publisher, or something like this. And the publisher puts demands on them. They want the material now, they want it in a certain format, they want it without any mistakes, and so the writers had a particular issue connected with spelling and grammar, and this was making them feel that they were not very good writers because they had a problem with grammar and spelling. And this is actually optional, to think of yourself as not very good because of those reasons. And if you examine what a writer is and what a writer is for and what a writer does, is a writer will present ideas in written form. And if it's grammatically correct or the spelling is incorrect, that's really very minor. But in their environment, this minor thing was made into a major thing. And when I was talking with them, I really needed to remind them that it is normal in certain environments for people to take a minor thing and make it into a major thing to make you doubt yourself. So that the reason behind this sort of thing is quite underhanded, and a person will feel personally under attack. But when you forget to keep everything in proper perspective, this creates a big stress which it doesn't have to, once you realize what the game is. So there are games that we find ourselves in in the professional environment, in the social environment. And these environments are competitive. Sometimes people say, well, there shouldn't be competition. Why do they say that? Because they want the competition not to be competitive, that's all. And if a person buys into the game, they are diminished in their ability to function. And all these games add to stress and add to the skewing of the merit of people in different environments. So the human world is complicated, and how do you make yourself resilient, bearing in mind all these games that are going on? And you need to be able to see what's going on, although it may be very sophisticated in how it hides itself, the game, and the players of the game. So I think that in order to be resilient in that arena, you must not be naive, and you must not take things at face value, because how it seems is not how it is. And if you are naive and trusting, you will assume that people are being honest with you, and actually a lot of the time they're not. And you need to be able to see it. So what I'm getting at is that in order to be resilient in a complex environment where there are a lot of games going on, you have to be able to discern and discriminate very well. And this is another of the powers that we learn about in Raj Yoga, power of discrimination. Now, a lot of people don't like that word discrimination because they think it means prejudice, but actually it doesn't. Discrimination means that you can see exactly what's going on, even though it is hidden, or even though it is not evident or not obvious. But you can discern what is there. You can discriminate between what is presented and what's really there. Now, why the word discrimination has bad press is because people use the word discrimination indiscriminately, which is interesting. They will apply the word discrimination as a catch-all to refer to anything that they think is unfair. And so this is another problem. Language gets used quite inappropriately. People use words without bearing in mind the meaning of those words. If we say race discrimination, it means that you will favor someone according to their race, where you should be favoring them according to their qualifications or their character. And then if somebody who has the necessary character and qualifications is not chosen because of their race, then that will be called racial discrimination. That means that you evaluate a person by the color of their face for something that has nothing to do with the color of their face. This is the meaning of discrimination. But hardly anybody thinks about it like that, or realizes that that's what the problem is, or why you use the word discrimination in that way. But in order to be resilient, you have to discriminate what the game is that's going on around you, so that you can become neutral and not be manipulated by the game into getting disempowered or doubting yourself, because this is going to force you to not be able to function properly if you don't discriminate that. So to build resilience, you need to build discrimination to really understand the games that are going on. Then you also have to have your own personal ethical policy. And many people think that ethics is general. Everyone has the same ethics and you use the same ethics in all situations. But no. Everything has to be looked at, bearing in mind that the world is complex. And a lot of people oversimplify it and then they get into trouble, because you cannot oversimplify something complex and get away with it. You will find yourself in trouble. So in the same way, you need to be able to catch the essentials. And that means to find the simple, clear vision of whatever is in front of you, so that you can see it clearly and accurately. And then that way it is simple, but that's not the same as simplistic. It's not the same as being simple-minded. It is that you are able to catch the essential. And then anything that is non-essential, you can put it aside very easily. And this is going to give you the power of resilience in various different settings. But you can see that the value of resilience is not really limited to just the word resilience, but you have to go into it and look at it in different contexts and understand how it applies to you in your situation at this time, and what sort of resilience do you need to develop at this time in this situation. And one of the other very interesting, well-known aphorisms that you find in the Bhagavad Gita is that situations arise, they persist for a while, and then they fade away. And that applies to everything and everyone, but especially situations. So whatever is your circumstance that you're dealing with and developing resilience around, that circumstance will not be there forever. A time will come when it's not there anymore. And you also have to discriminate that you may think, okay, I have to develop resilience regardless of what the circumstances are at whatever stage I am in my life. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to develop resilience for a particular time, particular circumstances, and then gradually, as you pay attention on developing resilience, you find that you develop different types of resilience as life goes by, and you are accumulating all kinds of different aspects of resilience. And then ultimately maybe people will think of you as a very resilient type of person, because they see your resilience in many different circumstances and situations. So there is that part. Now, sometimes you may find yourself in a situation where you're unfamiliar with that situation. It's a new situation. You don't have the characteristics and expertise and experience to be to function well in that situation, and that may also be very stressful for you. And so part of developing resilience in a situation like that is that you need to give yourself time to become familiar with a new situation. Because one of the difficulties of coming into a new situation is that you're the only one in that situation who's new to it. and the other people around you are not new to it. So you're at a disadvantage purely because you're new to it. But it may be that people will give you a hard time, or you will experience that you're having a hard time because you don't know what all the other people know. And to be resilient for that is something that can be quite difficult to develop, because you are sort of out of your familiar territory. This may happen when you move to a new job, or you move to a new country, or you go somewhere where it's a completely different culture. Whatever is the tacit agreements and understanding between all the people surrounding you, you don't know what that is because it's tacit. Tacit means nobody talks about it, and but everybody grew up with it, so everybody knows. And if you ask them, they won't tell you because it's tacit, you see. So this word tacit is quite an important word, because it can put you in a very uncomfortable situation, because you're the only one who doesn't know what is tacit, and nobody will talk about it. So to be resilient about that means you have to be resilient regarding your emotions and feelings around being in an uncomfortable, unfamiliar social environment. So to get resilient about that is something that is quite useful, because you do find yourself in completely new situations every so often. Depending on the individual, I think probably the majority of people don't shift culture and work and place and so on. Majority, they grow up somewhere, they know what the tacit agreements are, and they stay there from birth until death. So they don't need to have that kind of resilience. This is a kind of resilience that's needed for those individuals who keep shifting places, shifting jobs, shifting people who are around you, shifting cultures. And when you do it for the first time, you experience it being quite difficult. But once you've done it many times, you're increasing your experience, and the increase of experience is what gives you the resilience, and that you do not feel as uncomfortable in a similarly uncomfortable situation. And that takes the form of resilience, but I think that kind of resilience is a direct result of experience. So experience and resilience, I think, go together quite well. Another very important thing to be aware about is that you may be a person who's very sensitive, who's very fragile in many cases, and you feel everything too intensely, and you dislike things very easily, you like things very easily, you feel different. And how do you build resilience if you're somebody like that? Because you may have some resistance to developing resilience, because you may think that if you develop resilience, then you have to give up your sensitivity, your refinement, your culture, all this kind of thing. But I think here resilience is to do with finding compromise, finding common ground, finding areas where you can compromise without compromising the things that are really important to you. And if you judiciously create compromises, bearing in mind the circumstances and the social situation and so on, this ability to make compromises will actually give you a very good form of resilience. Om Shanti. Give yourself time to turn within. And be the being of light. Affirm, feel, and know I am a pure, peaceful, powerful, loving, and blissful being of light. I am light. I am free. I belong to the great being of light, the great source of wisdom. And everything I do is a preparation for the next thing. I am growing, becoming experienced, taking light from the light, taking strength, energy, all of that to be the essential, ideal me. And I sit with myself, remembering who I am. What is my purpose? Who am I with? And everything else is a wonderful game to be enjoyed and to acquire greater skill. Om Shanti.